Hello. Hi, everybody. I've been spending a lot of time on UFOs and physics and warp drive and so forth, and I wanted to spend a little bit of time on planetary regeneration topics. And so I kind of wanted to go over a little bit of what I know about the water cycle and how it relates to biodiversity and vegetation cover, sea level, climate, and a few other things. This is how you could do landscaping and gardening and land planning and stuff like this with resiliency in mind, with biodiversity in mind. We'll just focus on the ecological and hydrological aspects of this. So where do I start? I'll start with a typical or somewhat typical land setup where, you know, you've got a coastline. Let's put the water levels there. Got a coastline. Well, maybe let's grade that out. There's some mountains kind of into the coast a ways. Let's say this is just a model. It could be hundreds of miles in, but maybe some valleys. You know, they might have their own lakes. They might have their own rivers and stuff. But ideally, you know, we were told that the sun heats up the water, and the water goes up and goes into the sky, right? And it goes in, becomes vapor and clouds, and those go in and they drop rain, right? And that all happens. However, if this land is too dry or too hot and or doesn't have proper vegetation cover, what happens is the sun beats down here and these creates like thermal pockets and vortexes and albedo and stuff. And so this sunlight gets blasted back out here, and this interaction between the precipitation, the moisture, the clouds, the rain can't really happen as easily. And even if there are clouds, they'll go higher up, and they'll eventually drop their rain maybe on the top of the mountains, right as they finally scrape their butt on the top of these mountains here. But that's way after it's done any use. Here, you know, plants don't just get water from rivers. You know, they have this interaction with the sky, with the rain, called evapotranspiration, that mediates a lot of the water cycles and climate regulation. Oops, I said it. Of the forest and the chaparral, and how those all connect. Even meadows. There's a known effect called the biotic pump. Well, it's being studied still, but there's a lot of evidence for this. And what we need now is the modeling, because there's an observed effect. And let's say, so when, as we know, plants mediate transpiration, that's when water is respired out of the leaves and so forth, as a waste product of respiration, cellular respiration, which is always, it's going on during the day. It's not exactly true that it happens at night, although more so at night when it's cool and safe for them to open their stoma, or sorry, not stoma, but the stomata, the cells at the bottom of their leaves. So you got these things opening and closing on the bottom of the leaves, kind of like little coffee beans or parts of the female anatomy on vertebrates, some vertebrates, but they sort of look like this. They open, they close, and while they're doing that, they are precipitating water or jetting out water vapor out in the environment. But that they also have a regulation of this pressure that sort of is linked to photosynthesis and respiration in some ways, because basically what plants are doing is they're splitting water with this energy of the sun and creating chemical gradient inside the cells, of hydrogen piled up on one side and oxygen piled up on the other side. And I forget which way exactly, but over a membrane they cause these to rush across with a spinny bob, your ATP synthase, which we also have in vertebrates and animal life and stuff, higher eukaryotes in the mitochondria. But this is basically what they're doing. They're taking that most ideal chemical energy of the universe, almost the energy in water, and splitting it and reunifying, like we ideally, like the water-powered car, except they're figuring it out. So they have so many things figured out. We will really advance when we start beginning to understand the complex intelligence in plants, but we're only just now getting the modeling systems with AI and so forth to be able to track these things properly. Regardless, so when you don't have plant cover, you get this albedo. You've got water maybe coming through quickly through streams from the mountains, but it's running right downhill, going into the sea. The sea levels rise. They talk about sea level rise from ice, but it's also just as easily from, when the land is not sponging up this water and getting dense with lots of trees and stuff like that. Think about the living biomass of the Olympic Peninsula where I live, that it's just a huge sponge for water. When that water's not in and on the land, where is it? It's going to be in the ocean or in ice. If it's not in ice, but if it's in either, it's going to be in the ocean. And that's sea level rise, which ironically goes and contaminates aquifers, kills trees inland and stuff like that. So, the way to reverse it, because this is driven by erosion, and it's worsened by erosion and more human activities, and then we aquifer, or we reservoir, we duct, we take and do aqueducts, which channels the water even more, and so that's a losing game, though. That's what you do. That's like triage for a dying patient, right? That's after the hydrological system's broken down and the natural precipitation is broken down now. So trees and plants, and I've written a couple papers about this and worked with lots of people on this, the scientists working on this around the world. And trees help make this atmospheric river, they call it, in Amazon, and other such things that they do, where en masse, like one individual plant might not have the power in one or two cells, one or two leaves to do this, but together, and now we know, through mycology and through the hyphae connected throughout the forest, they're trading resources, information, data through all these different species in the forest. It's kind of like a global forest mind, but we've cut that up into pieces, and these little isolated pockets, they can only do so much together. They can only do so much communication. They're disconnected. We cut channels and concrete aqueducts and things through that surface layer of interconnected substrate, like soil, root, living stuff. And so what's the answer? The answer, this could explain so much of the problems and solution behind climate breakdown. Bad word again. But I only say that because it's been usurped. So we talk about the stream miles. We talk about increasing the distance that water has to travel. Think about it as in a straight line, it's so much distance, and it takes only so much time. If you're riding a bike straight down a hill, for example, well, what do? They put switchbacks for a bike, right? Same as water. If you put switchbacks, you can slowly cruise down here. Each one of these lappy fringes is surrounded by stuff. You might have like trout ponds, and if it's a good enough neighborhood designed around the water instead of the human use, Everybody can be happy. There's fruit trees, there's ponds, there's creeks, there's everything, there's abundance. If you're not planning for this massive industrial monoculture of humanity and technology and industry, right? You can do all of these things if you have this holistic, integrative planning setup. So, this is the essence of a lot of the game in what they call permaculture and sustainable land use setup, and it is encapsulated in so many indigenous techniques, from the Nabateans to the Incans in Machu Picchu, and I think even in Hawaii and a lot of other places, and even in my area, there's at least one of the local languages, the words for land and water are not separate words per se. They're contiguous. It's a contiguous system. Our ideas of separation have led to the problems that are now manifesting as all of this. So it's a big problem, but it's not that big of a problem. So in addition to, increasing stream miles, well, that's a big thing. That takes working with your governments and stuff like that. If you're in a backyard, though, let's say you've got a slope, you can take the debris from around you and kind of put it on contour. And what that means is if you took a topographical map, or you took a pipe and laid it down flat on the ground on the hillside, and it was level, right? And it didn't move or barely moved at all. To the extent that it's safe, right? Because piling this much, you got to make sure that the ground is stable. That's why going slow is another one of the. We have to move quick, but we also have to gradually build. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And you will do amazing things even just with what you do. So this is essentially rebuilding the land, and what that does is that you don't even have to plant anything right then, but the seeds and the soil and the eggs of the living things, the worm eggs and little spores and stuff like that, will take root, as the water moves down, even with flash floods. So if you're in a dry area that rains like once a year and you got these mega floods and stuff, that's just before that, and throughout the year, that's when you're setting up these berms and swales and stone lines and log lines, and just ways that the soil and the good stuff and the rich minerals and seeds and life all accumulate in these lines, right? And by the by, you've got a place that's looking more and more like paradise, because what happens is then the trees and the shrubs, succession occurs. Pioneering species come in, and they're followed up by other species, and it gradually gets more established, and that has a, how do we call it, an asymptotic or logarithmic factor to it. It's exponentially, life finds a way, right? So this is about restoring a virtuous cycle. It's built into nature, right? This is how, separate of all this other disturbance, how it's supposed to work. So I'm not even going to get into technology, but where this comes to human culture and human civilization, how we can adapt, to the situation. Draw a little friendly, happy little dolphin jumping because he's happy that the virtuous climate cycle has been restored. He's stoked because we learned to decentralize our economies and our political systems and our technological systems and our industrial systems through regenerative community agriculture, through bike recycleries, through upcycling and maker spaces, and 3D printing, and open source collaboration in general, not this command and control driven sort of, we say we're not in a planned economy, but we're in a very, very much planned economy. That's indicated by the fact that these corporate forces seem to have such tight control with the governmental forces, and one's definitely talking to the other, and that we get this policy that seems to reflect the interest of both the formerly corporate government our representatives in government that are formerly corporate, and vice versa, with the revolving door, and on this cusp of the degenerative cycle. I didn't do much to map that out, but on the cusp of the degenerative cycle, we have, moments like Lahaina and, Paradise, California, and that's when the system is really tipped over, and then just the slightest matchstick can burst the dam, right? And then you have these extreme events that are being triggered by just power lines and so forth, and people blame then the matchstick, but it's actually the dam was overwhelmed, right, and then poorly built in the first place. Dam's not a bad metaphor in this case. In this case, actually busting the dam, the real dams could help, because ironically, when we go and sequester all this water, let's say we have a reservoir up here or something like that, then that's not totally natural. That interferes with the flow of fish and other natural life to it, and so you can't. The bears actually, and other creatures that come down and amble down and get those fish and catch those fish, and they bring them back in the forest. And guess what they do? They poop in the forest. The old phrase is a bear shit in the woods. Well, yes, and delivers a whole bunch of nutrients from the ocean back up here. So, they talk about John D. Liu and other people like this that are literally what they're trying to do in some cases is in more slightly brackish or more freshwater conditions, trying to take the silt that's gathered in the bottoms of areas in the water and move it up onto the other side of berms and stuff that they've created here to remineralize, and with kelp and things like that, possibly remineralize. But again, nature doing the thing for us, right? But we cut it off with our reactions to make sure that for human use and so forth, we keep this for ourselves, and basically shoot ourselves in the foot in so many ways of speaking, that really compromise the whole system for every living thing, including ourselves. And that's just really sad. And beavers obviously really help with this process. For any wallowers, it's hard to live. They're hard to live with and hard to ask people to get into, right? Because beavers, where they live, can cause a lot of damage, can cause a lot of havoc. There's professionals like Jacob Shockey and others, the Beaver Coalition, that are working with local, state, and national governments to establish policies to make it easier for people to live with beaver. But then, you have more extreme examples like crocodiles and hippopotami. Those are very dangerous animals. However, their role in river ecosystems is undeniable, and sort of help protect the integrity of those places, keep more washouts from happening, create their own wallows. But where they create wallows, they make sure that those aren't increased unduly. Erosion isn't increased unduly by wildebeest migrations or overgrazing by cattle and so forth. You got the crocodile there. Similar, it's a trophic cascade thing with the crocodile. With wolves in Yellowstone, when they reintroduced them, they were, making it so that the elk would not go too far from into the shrubbery, right? And so they weren't nibbling the edges of the shrubbery, and they were not pushing into the forest. So these were maintained, these root systems that hold up the ground and transfer the water and connect and stuff were not as disturbed. So in the end, the rivers got more stable, and there was more forest growth, and Yellowstone benefited, and that's what we call the trophic cascade. So animals play a part in this, human activity plays a part in this, and I appreciate the time listening to me go on about this. If you have any more questions, please comment, subscribe, like, support me in my work, what I do, this and other things. Stick around, and you might enjoy what we do around here. Thanks. Bye.